Hey folks, this is your instructor Dan coming back at you with demo number 2 of 2. So I'm picking up where I left off. This is basically the view that we had as the last screencast ended. I've changed the land use colors to something a little more pleasing to the eye. And also, I was in the process of labeling schools, and again, just wanted to remind you that, you can label things from just right-clicking from the context menu. But it is helpful to remember that labels are a property, and I will not ask you to go into a lot of depth in this. However, you should be able to change the font size and the font type and so forth. But most notably, you need to pay attention to the label fields. So, for example, you may find that your schools are defaulting to something other than the name. And so when you come in to label them, you're going to get something that you don't really want. And so you're going to need to be able to go into your properties, change to the appropriate name. I think actually I labeled the wrong thing there. Sorry about that. Let me go back and undo that. And there we go. So I changed them to the zip code. And now I can come in and say, I don't really want the zip code. What I want is the name. And that I have to do from the Labels tab in Layer Properties. Okay, so we have done a classification by categories. So if we go to our Symbology tab, we see we're operating under the categories. For the most part, I've had you just using unique values. Remember, you have to specify the value field, and you also have to add the values. The easiest way is to use the add all values. But I want to give a quantities example as well. And so I'm just going to turn off these other layers that I have working, and I'm going to show you something called wastewater mains in this data set. And as we can see, we have a simple single symbol representation of these. That's the default symbology that's used. And I'm going to use quantities to represent this by slope. And what we can see here is that it's defaulting to a certain number of classes. So I might specify that we only want to use 4 classes for slope. And you have the ability to go in here and format the labels so that if you wanted to, for example, use this as a percentage, and in this case it represents a fraction, okay? And so there's some things that we can do in terms of formatting the labels. A few too many decimal places in here, so I won't ask you to do a whole lot with this, but you should be aware that you can edit the format of your features. And so in this case, again, quantitative data, numeric data. It's using classes. You'll notice that it's defaulting to the natural breaks classification method. We could choose another classification method. So if I were to do equal interval, for example, it would change the nature of the way that things go. You can see I'm going basically 0.9% or 1% for each class in this category. And so I'll go ahead and say OK. Better grab my battery pack while I'm talking here, since I just got flashed a message that I may be running out of juice. And so now we can see these categories represented. They're a little hard to see in this case because of the colors that I've chosen. Actually, they may actually show up a little bit better if I were to put them over the top of the land use. And bear with me while I plug in my computer. Okay, I'm back. All right, so we're going to shift gears now and talk a little bit about editing. And of course, we are interested in working in the geodatabase environment. And so if I come over into this area, I have a demo file geodatabase, and I might come in here And one thing to be aware of is, of course, I could simply come across and copy and paste into my database. And that's a fairly simple operation that we see it popped in there. I could also import something. So I could say I'm interested in importing a feature class. In this case, this will allow me to bring in the streets layer. And it's worth keeping in mind that when you do this, I could browse to that as well, but I just dragged and dropped. And it already has the output location. You'll notice that I have to specify the feature class. And so I am going to advocate that you, when you're thinking about import versus copying, the general rule is that you copy from a geodatabase to another, you import from another feature class, but or from a shapefile. But if you're unable to copy, use the import. If import gives you a problem, you might try copying it. So generally speaking, import's going to give you more flexibility. There you see a verification that it worked. Like to verify your results, there we can see roads that I just inserted. Now I do want to remind you that you need to think about initiating these actions from the destination where you want them to end up. And so for example, I just put things outside of the county base as opposed to within them. Now, in order for them to have ended up in the county base, I would have needed to say that to import into this location. And this, method of organizing our data, one thing you want to keep in mind is that your feature data set has a defined spatial referencing. So everything within this feature data set, in this case the county boundary and the roads, needs to have that same referencing system. And so if you were to import into this, you would be importing it and changing the spatial referencing along the way. All right, so we are going to create a couple feature classes from scratch, and in this case, this is going to give us the ability to create empty feature classes, and those empty feature classes, of course, are ideal because if we have an empty feature class, we have something that we can digitize into. Okay, and so simple process here where I'm going to say this is a sample poly. Here I am a polygon layer, and you want to pay attention to the type, and it doesn't like the name because I have a space in the middle of it, so I'll use an underscore. And it's going to ask me about the coordinate system, and you can choose from a list or you can import. Okay, and so we have our folder connections here, and we have this demo database that we're working from, and so I might want to specify that I want to use the county base spatial referencing, and there it brings in the information, and XY tolerance. You can just accept the default on these guys. But you do want to remember that you can create a name, and anytime you're defining a field, you give it a name and also a type. Okay, and so I might have something that is a unit ID number, just to show you how we can create integer as your most basic number. With name, you'll notice that the length is shown below, so you can edit the length. And I'll say finish. I'm going to go ahead and add in a new feature class, and I'm going to call this one sample point so that we can see a little bit of a different feature. Remember to specify your type. We're only working with the top 3 right now. just going to go ahead. I'm going to leave this one without attributes just for simplicity's sake. Okay, so those went ahead and added into my layer, and I'm going to just bring up my raster here. I'm going to turn off some of my other layers that I have going on. You can see roads are in there. And so we've got kind of a coarse image to work from here, but we'll just work with this since it's what we have available to us. And I'm going to go ahead and just select this guy as a way of illustrating how you can create a point. So bear with me for a moment. I'm just going to save those coordinates for a second. All right, so we are editing. And in order to initiate the editing, you can simply right-click and say Start Editing. And this will bring up your editor toolbar. And it shows me the two layers that I have to work from. And here we have, by default, the Create Features dialog has come in. And so we have the polygon tool, and now we can simply start to delineate polygons. I actually closed that one inadvertently. Okay, so I'm just showing a few different samples here. And so we have a few different polygons going. And you can see that this one is selected. And now I just want to remind you that when you see the vertices on the screen like this, this means that you're in an active sketch. And so when you're in an active sketch, if you right-click your mouse, you have some capabilities in here. And there's a lot of things that you can put in here. You want to be familiar with direction and length. The fact that you can add in an absolute XY value, which would be like a coordinate value. So for example, I just stole some coordinates just to know what my coordinate base is. So I'm going to go ahead and, oops, bring in some noise up here. Got a lot of things on my screen. All right, so let's go ahead and you won't need to take coordinates. I would provide you with the coordinates, but in this case, I just want to illustrate how simply by grabbing a coordinate that's found in this location, that this can now be added into your XY dialog, an absolute XY value, and I'll hit return, and I should have added that point at that location. Not sure why that didn't work. Oh, here we go. It's indicating in meters. That should be fine. I'm going to go ahead and finish this sketch. Okay, so remember when you're doing a sketch, that's the common way to complete it. Remember when you're working with polygons, I'll come back to the absolute XY here in a second, but when you're working with polygons, remember that you have the ability to create things that are square, and you can do that with these parallel and perpendicular tools. My favorite, well, remember you also have a rectangle tool here as well, or choice, but my favorite way to work from these is from the feature construction toolbar to, you know, again, if I'm going to create a square polygon, or if I want to create right angles, I simply say that I want to work perpendicular. I click at the reference point, okay, and I might say, all right, now I want to be perpendicular to that, and so I'll reference the line before it. Whoops. Interesting, I seem to be prematurely closing out my polygons, which I'm not sure why that's going on, but let's continue on here. I'm going to go ahead and say delete sketch. See if we can demo this again. So set the point, perpendicular, back reference the point, and you do have something called square and finish, which is